So, welcome to episode 3 in series 4 of the OTTRed Spotlight podcast. I'm extremely proud to introduce Christian Toksvig, who is going to talk, like all of our other guests in every other series, about his career, the lessons that he's learned, and the things that he thinks are prominent now with the stage that our sector within OTT, broadcast and media is at. We've got a range of experience with Christian when it comes to a various range of geographies. So I'm very much looking forward to getting into his experience with the roles that he's had. Christian, welcome to the OTTRed Spotlight podcast.
Thank you, Chris. It's an honor to be here.
Well, look, I am very much looking forward to our conversation. There's a few topics that we've spoken about before that we're going to touch on. But Christian, we first met each other at IBC this year. So actually in September, beginning part of September this year in Amsterdam, I was doing podcasts on the Bedrock stand. You're a pretty tall guy, so it was pretty easy to spot you when you were standing there on the Bedrock stand. And I think Jonas, the chief executive at Bedrock, introduced us to each other. How did you find IBC this year?
I was using it as a place of reconnaissance, figuring out what was going on in technology, in OTT product, and so on. And then, of course, I was networking with my own contacts. I just started my own business, so I had to go and pitch and try to get my projects off the ground. So IBC was for that purpose. And I'm half Dutch, so Amsterdam is actually my other hometown. So it's actually nice to go back there and see my family and so on. So that's a bonus for me whenever I go there.
You've got to be there. If you don't get in trouble with your industry peers, you get in trouble with your family for not going, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Christian, you just mentioned that you've got your own company. I'm aware of the fact there's a couple of things you're doing at the moment. There's a one-off assignment in Eastern Europe that you're lending support to with your experience. You're also the co-founder of Coco Media, which is a distribution-orientated business. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to now. They're two things, but I'm pretty sure that you're probably involved in lots of things, either through your own network or just through personal interest. What stage is this prolific career at now in terms of what occupies your time?
Yeah, it's really a new stage of my career. I've been employed for all the other years that I've been working, and this is really the first year that I'm truly stepping out on my own. And it's something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, but it's also a function of, I think, where the big companies in the industries are at the moment. A lot of, let's say, big careers have been kneecapped or cut short this year because of the various problems that the big media companies are into. And mine was one of those. So I was in both sort of pushed into it and also wanted to go into it. Together with a former colleague, I identified that there was, of course, as most media professionals know, a lot of growth happening in fast business. So the fast channels are one of the more interesting areas that are really seeing a lot of audience growth. And so we were starting to look at fast and seeing that it was mainly focused around US content, mostly US library content that was just sort of being distributed across the world. And we saw there was a big need for non-English language content, which so far hasn't really proliferated. My co-founder is Turkish, and so he has good connections to the Turkish production studios and so on. So that's how that was the insight that founded this business. So it's a business where we distribute non-English, non-Hollywood content to fast channels. And we're really just getting started. So we're at a very, very early stage, but it's exciting. It's great to wake up in the morning and go to work for yourself, which is something I've been wanting to do for a long time.
Well, you've worked for some big names as well, Christian. You know, that when I read out the list in a second, or maybe you could touch on a few of them, the experience that you must have had in some of those organizations must be invaluable for those moments where you wake up now and it's totally your decision what you're going to do. You know, the way you point the business, which content you go after, who you're going to distribute that to. Turkey's a big market as well. I hadn't realized until recently when I was speaking to Manjot Sandu from ZTV, who obviously have recently been taken over by Sony. and he was talking to me about Turkey, and I hadn't quite realized what a content engine Turkey is. It's massive, isn't it, in terms of content production?
If you're looking at, outside of Hollywood and maybe take the UK and say this is all the English language, those are obviously big production powerhouses. Then I think Bollywood and Korea are the only ones that are standing above Turkey right now. Turkey, I would say, is the fourth largest. I don't have the exact numbers, but the Turks themselves say that they're doing $1 billion worth of content export annually. And what is interesting from a perspective of, we're two white dudes from Western Europe. I know you're living in the Middle East, but culturally, you're British, I'm Danish/Dutch. We don't really see all the content that the rest of the world watches, and they watch a ton of Turkish soap operas and they watch a ton of Bollywood. And so we're kind of living in the little pocket, or we're from the little pocket that doesn't watch this kind of content very much.
Yeah. It's interesting actually, because you just mentioned I'm here in Dubai, and I kind of make sure that I expose myself as frequently as possible to what's going on here. So, Shahid, the NBC OTT platform, is one that I tune into quite a lot. The quality of the productions, coming from this part of the world, and this is what's opened my mind to the point that you've just made, is phenomenal. The drama series are really powerful. And I guess that is an indication of the culture, the origin of where these productions come from are rich when it comes to storytelling, drama, the depth and passion of the way that even the languages are spoken in other parts of the world. That comes through in the content as well, I think.
Yeah, I think the storytelling that especially Bollywood and Turkey espouses is really something that resonates with people who live in those kinds of countries. So these are countries that are fairly newly industrialized, where people are still moving from the countryside into the cities. They have this clash of traditional values and modern values. The kids want educations, they want sexual freedom, they want to earn their own money. Whereas in the previous generations, girls would go in the home and men would go on the field, whatever. All this kind of culture clash and material change of their standing in society, that's what these shows are actually about. And when you look at what Western TV shows are often about, they sort of are a mirror to life in the Western countries. So there's a lot of things with drugs and crime and gangsters and sexual orientation, things that a big part of the world couldn't actually even show legally, right? And may not have that big an interest in. So there's really a sort of division between the different audiences, what they're interested in and what they seek out.
And when it comes to the point that you'd said you and the co-founder at Coco Media had been stimulated by, in terms of the business model, FAST. What's your opinion on how that's going? Because that's still a relatively new model. The pendulum swung from linear through to OTT, SVOD, AVOD, etc. And now FAST is definitely the currency of conversation in so many professional conversations in our sector. What's your personal take, Christian, on how that's looking, how it's shaping up and where it's going?
So I think FAST is the answer to a couple of streams in consumer in the way consumers behave. So FAST is, first of all, a response to the problem of choice. So many streaming services, we don't know what to watch, and actually it's kind of liberating to just sit down and switch on, and then there's something there. So that's actually you're going back to having less choice, and actually that works for a lot of people. Switch the TV on, don't worry too much about what you want to watch, just watch whatever's on. So that's one. And the other is, of course, that families are spending less money, have less money than they did a few years ago. So therefore they're prioritizing their entertainment dollar, and FAST is one way to save money on entertainment while still having access to quality content. So I
Yeah.
think that's why Fast has grown. It's it's very much a US phenomenon. Until now, it's still growing in other countries, but I think the eyeballs are coming, but the money's not there yet. If you're looking at Western Europe and most places outside the US, but it's absolutely on the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I have that conversation with people from all over the world, Fast. And the point you just made around the commercial potential associated to Fast, I think inevitably is what's drawing attention, right? You saw those, I think it was a couple of years ago now, that those shocking Netflix results came out, and everybody started to talk about terms such as binge watching, subscription attrition, all of those kind of things. In fact, businesses really prospered from that. If you look at Kling in your part of the world in Amsterdam, subscriber retention is their business. It's a really cool niche to operate in. And then you've got Evergent and some other organizations that are really focusing themselves on these niche aspects of content provision. But, we spoke before we turned the camera on, Christian, about advertising to the market, and how important this is at the moment. In the last episode of OTTRed Spotlight podcast, I had a guy called Narayan on, and he's the global head of growth for vServe. Now, vServe are the biggest ad server organization in India. You've got over 1 billion people in India. The amount of data that they can get their hands on to drive the right kind of content to the right kind of people is phenomenal. Behind the scenes, do you think that the sector is being innovative enough when it comes to driving Fast and getting all of the right kind of data so that content to the right people, this is your game now, right? Getting the right content to the right people is effective?
I'm still learning about advertising, how that works in Fast, because it's extremely complicated.
It is,
And
yeah.
and it's if it's complicated for me as a distributor, I'm sure it's also complicated for the customers, advertising agencies, and advertisers, and so on. Fast is still a very fragmented place, because there's lots of different platforms, lots of different servers, and there are servers that can only work on certain TV sets and certain platforms and so on. So it is not, it's a very fragmented place. So it's very difficult to place and book um, major campaigns and get the numbers, basically get the audience numbers. Even though I'm sure the targeting is amazing compared to broadcast, the numbers are just not big enough. There's not a big enough audience. And so I can't say that I'm a big expert on how ad tech works for Fast, but I certainly can see that the money that I think most producers and distributors are looking for is still not there.
Yeah. Christian, I want to make sure that we've got enough time to talk about your career, because you've done some interesting things, and I want to take you back to the iFlix kind of period, because I think that was a really exciting point in the sector. When you were at iFlix, you had a big job, right? We both know some of the guys that reported into you. One of them is my friend here in Dubai. Talk us through your career. How have you got to the level that you're at now? How have you had some of the roles that you've had, for example, commercial director and head of business development at Bedrock? You already mentioned HBO Max, Warner Brothers. You were there for a period of time. Metro News as well, you've spoken about. Talk to us about this kind of media and content career that you've had and how you've ended up with us having this conversation today.
Well, yeah, it's been a long career. I'm old. I have been in sort of my career falls into three big buckets. I started in print, and this was in the early 2000s. And as you say, I was at Metro, which was the free distributed newspaper that came out in various public transport systems around the world. That idea originated in Sweden. And as I was growing up next door to Sweden and Denmark, some of my study mates and colleagues from that early time were starting to work in that business. And so I got my first job in Metro, actually, and moved to London and started working on the launch campaigns and launch plans for that business. It was a very aggressive global domination play Unfortunately, it was, of course, the internet caught up with the newspaper industry, and it didn't turn into the kind of it didn't deliver on the ambition because of the technological evolution. And I spent a long time in the UK. I was living in London at that time. After I worked for Metro, I joined Northern and Shell, which was the publisher of OK Magazine.
Yeah.
And that was a very different, sort of very lifestyle, fluffy, sweet, fizzy publication that was doing incredibly well in the United Kingdom, but was not very well known overseas. We created an international licensing property out of it, where we licensed the brand and the content, and we've hit the wave perfectly with reality TV and the interest in celebrity culture. So that really took off, and I think we launched that in about 30 countries in around 5 years. So that was a fun period. I had, even from the days of Metro, I was thinking that the internet is going to one day make short shrift of all these print publications. So I was very keen to make the move into digital. And the chance to do that came when I joined Getty Images, which is a marketplace for professional photography and video. Probably the most sort of well-known company in that space.
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
are, the company that delivers content to a lot of advertising agencies and a lot of media companies around the world. Very big, profitable, very, very well run, really blue chip, I would say, company. So from being in this very scrappy tabloid business of London to the blue chip hallways of New York and Seattle with Getty Images was an interesting move. That company and that career took me to Asia, because I was then hired by one of the competitors to Getty Images to start a new photo-based marketplace. It didn't turn out as I had expected. I was in Asia. I'd been there for 1 year, and it frankly wasn't the thing that I had expected, or maybe that the company had expected either. So I was a little bit at a loss, frankly. And the next step, but as it always happens, when you think that you don't know what you're going to do next and the plan doesn't work, you make another one, or another thing turns up in front of you. And that thing that turned up was iFlix, which was an extremely ambitious streaming play for emerging markets, not just for Asia, but for the entire emerging world. And I had really, it was mind-boggling, the ambition that these guys had,
Well,
and the execution that they needed. But
just for those that don't know, what was the iFlix vision? Because from my perspective, as someone working in the recruitment side of our sector, it feels as though the people that were involved with that ambition and that vision learned some amazingly good lessons from how tough it was, how ambitious it was, how driven it was. What was the vision? Just give people listening an idea of, what you were expected to achieve at iFlix.
so this was around 2014, 2015, where it's hard to remember now, because there were no streaming services. There was only Netflix, right? Everyone else was either ignoring it or thinking that they were going to make money off Netflix, right? That's how the other studios were behaving at the time. The people behind iFlix correctly saw that Netflix, as it was in that iteration, wouldn't work in emerging markets, because it was a proposition that was based on Hollywood content. We just talked about how that has its limits in the rest of the world. It was based on big screen TVs, which people didn't have in Asia. It was based on credit card payments, which people also didn't have. I mean, there was a lot of things that Netflix needed to kind of scale before they could get into this part of the world. So they were saying, the founders of iFlix said, hey, there's an opportunity here to create a really emerging market focused product. And they managed to get some very heavy hitting investors. TPG was one of them. Hearst from the US was another. So they really were that vision really took hold with some seriously moneyed investors. And then the time came to develop the product and actually execute and grow into markets in Africa, Middle East, Asia. It was a wild ride for all of those of us who were part of it, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I gather from conversations that we've had before that that was a period in your career where you were regularly jumping on flights, heading off to these exotic destinations, just trying to qualify whether or not that proposition was going to get traction. What were some of the interesting anecdotes, Christian, from those meetings that you're having when you went to those places with the kind of vision that you've just articulated? What was the reception that you met?
The reception was very positive. I mean, these markets didn't feel that they were being seen by the media giants and that they were being taken seriously. And I went to, I launched it or me and the team, we launched it in Pakistan, we launched it in Morocco, we launched it in Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, building teams, hiring people, making distribution deals with telecoms. This was a major, major rollout. And of course, at the same time, we had our, let's say, home markets in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines. It was a huge mouthful, even for the best of I mean, and I think we did have some of the best people. We really had some amazing people, but even for the best people, this was a very big mouthful to take on, because emerging markets aren't all the same. They're all emerging in different ways, right? Latin America, Middle East, and Southeast Asia, they may look similar if you compare their GDP per capita, but the content they want to watch, the language they speak, I mean, there are a lot of logistical challenges you have to solve. So that we ran into some of those pretty hard.
Barry Dubovsky, the chief operating officer at Showmax, was on the show last week, and he was talking to us about Africa. And it was mind-blowing just listening to the number of different countries there are in Africa. The way that, as you'd mentioned, credit cards in the way that we take them to be in different economies where you can just pay for everything, and there's an e-commerce type element to the way you interact and procure, doesn't exist. Everything's kind of prepay type model in Africa. And it was crazy to hear that a lot of the way that those economies and people in those economies are getting things like the EPL, the English Premier League. They still turn up, they still go to a stand, they pay for whatever they're going to take, and then their drop off on the third week of the month before the pickup is just unbelievable. It's just the way those economies are, right? So you went from iFlix to Bedrock.
Yes, I think so. Yes, I think I did. No. Sorry, I had Astro in the middle. I was at 2 years I was at Astro for 2 years, which is the the major pay TV operator in Southeast Asia. The thing that all of us who worked at iFlix brought with us was a huge amount of experience in many, many different ways to create a streaming service, because iFlix pivots it every 2 weeks, basically. And we were SVOD, we were AVOD, we were HVOD, we were everything VOD within a very short amount of time, which in, let's say, normal companies will take, years to execute a pivot. In iFlix, we executed extremely quickly, too quickly, of course, in many cases. But what it did, it meant that we all had a huge amount of experience with many, many different aspects of streaming, which I think made us relatively attractive candidates to come into other companies and help them with their streaming efforts. And that was the case in Astro. Astro, has been a incumbent pay TV player in Southeast Asia for 30 years, extremely big brand, very well regarded, good content, stable. But as happens with all of the legacy media players, of course, really challenged by the new streaming services. So I went in and rebuilt their streaming service together with the team there, and we started a new streaming service aimed at younger audiences called Suka, which is took a lot of the learnings from iFlix about what young people want, how they want to pay, um, and when they want to pay. They want to watch on their small screen instead of the big screen, and we put that all into this new product, which has landed very well in Malaysia.
So let's just catch up on the career journey so far, Christian. You're
Go on.
you're in
It's hard to keep
Denmark.
up.
You're in Denmark. One of your buddies in Sweden talks to you about this concept called Metro News. You end up shifting over to London to help drive that. That's the kind of gritty end of the market, real aggressive. That's where you have to get stuff done. From there, you go to Northern and Shell, which is the okay, more eloquent, kind of more glossy side of things. But you're still in print, but you get some great experience of how to license estates out to various different jurisdictions in that. Then you flick over more into the digital side with Getty Images. Were you in New York or were you still in London at the point with Getty?
I was based in London and
Okay.
Also really traveling the world for that company as well.
Yeah. Then you move over into iFlix, into Asia. So geographically, you're already doing a pretty big lap of the earth at this point. And then you move over into Astro. At that point in your career, Christian, if you'd have looked over your shoulder and had to summarize what you'd learn and what you felt like you were becoming, what would that have been?
I think that would have been this realization and recognition that every media market needs to be seen on its own terms. That this being an international media player really requires a lot of versioning and localization of not just the content. It's not just a matter of subtitling and local productions. It is a complete recognition that audiences and consumers behave very differently in different parts of the world. So I think that's one thing that I'm very attuned to now. I really understand that audiences are different, even if they may, like some of the same things. They behave in a very different manner typically.
Okay. So you went from Astro and then you went into Bedrock. That was the point where you were commercial.
So my family and I, after 6 years in Asia and COVID hit, we felt that we had to be a bit closer to home. So it was really sort of a private decision that we wanted to move back to Europe. And we landed back in Denmark, which is where we started, basically. Professionally, I was sad to give it up because I really enjoyed working in Asia, but I felt like for some private family reasons, we had to be closer to parents and grandparents and so on. And so we made the move back to Europe, and I landed with my ex-iFlix colleague, Jonas Engvall, and his team in Bedrock, which is a streaming platform provider, right? So they're not a B2C company, they're a B2B company.
Yeah, so the career takes another diverse turn. They're an interesting company as well, because one of the things I like about Bedrock in terms of the pedigrees, kind of the Bertelsmann, RTL, they are a platform provider from within a broadcasting organization. And I think that gives them a pretty unique posture in terms of their sense of authority within that competitive horizon or on that competitive horizon. What was your view when you were in that role of that competitive horizon? Because by this point, there were a lot of platform providers, right, that had emerged and that had developed and come from various different points of origin. There's a kind of Cinemedia, lots of different organizations, Endeavor, etc. What's your view of that particular corner of the market? Because that's really the engine that keeps a lot of these direct-to-consumer content provisions going, right?
Yeah, I think you have to remember that when streaming started, or when we all started getting into streaming as consumers, the platforms were incredibly important because a lot of the time they didn't work, right? I mean, in those days, 2015, 2016, you could still have an app that crashed 3 times when you were trying to watch something, especially if you wanted to watch some live content like a football match or something.
Yeah.
The system wasn't stable. So of course the key challenge for all the platform providers was to get the thing to bloody work, right? And that's of course why media companies like RTL or Bertelsmann, which is a major player, said this is too important to let someone else handle. We've got to insource this. We got to have our own platform. This is strategic for us. And so major broadcasters and major media companies can afford that because it costs like 50 to 70 million euro a year to run a good streaming platform. And that's a lot if you are a sort of middle-sized broadcaster. So, and now we're in 2023, and most of the time the apps are working. So the technology has gotten better. And as it gets better, the space for the streaming app space becomes more commoditized because it's not so much about does it work or doesn't it work. It pretty much always works, and then it's just a matter of who's doing it for us, what features can they build, how quickly can they build them, and so on. So the space is becoming, I think, tighter for the players in that space, even though of course there's still a lot of underlying growth in streaming, and streaming is not just happening in media, right? Corporates are doing streaming too. If you go on BMW's website, the first thing you see is a video of a car that flies across the screen. That's built by a streaming player too. So it's not just media.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I was speaking to somebody today, and not today, recently, one of the senior leaders at Xperi, and they were saying actually that the way that everything now is in, motion, images, content, actually the telcos are doing pretty well out of the need for connectivity as well. If you look at 5G and the demand for that and the way that people consume all of this high density content on a massive range of devices, the telcos are enjoying that moment too, I think, with the extra capacity that they're putting in the ground and in the sky for us to enjoy that content. Which leads me on to my next point, Christian. Where do you think the industry is, and where's it going to head to in the next 24 months? Because someone described to me recently that 2023 has been a stabilization year. There's that big peak after COVID. Everybody kind of enjoyed that. And this year's been a stabilization influence. What do you think 2024 is going to look like?
If we're talking about media and streaming specifically, I think we're still in for a big consolidation. The dream of having a global streaming platform is still alive, but only among a handful of players. And they really have to bulk up and consolidate if they're going to make it work. If you look at pretty much everyone except Netflix is losing money on an annual basis. That cannot go on now that financing is much more expensive than it was 3 years ago. And now that, I guess most of the big players, I was at HBO recently for a year, and they had a dream of having a global sort of service. Then Discovery came in and said, look, we actually have to be an arms dealer. We have to license our content and be a bit more nimble because it's just too expensive to build something with 200 million plus subscribers. So I think there's going to be consolidation. There's going to be takeovers. There's going to be closures. It's still not going to be pretty in 2024. That's my prediction. I think some of the few beams of light are still in Fast because Fast is going to grow and the money is going to come. And social media or social video like YouTube and TikTok, I don't think that's slowing down either. Advertising is going to return. That's also my prediction. It'll return in 2024. Companies have been saving a lot of money on advertising this year. And I think next year they're going to start expanding a little bit more because the economy is looking more better for the next sort of 12 to 18 months.
And what about Coco Media, Christian? What are you and your partner hoping for in 2024 and going forward? Because this year's been the establishment year, right?
That's right. So really, our biggest celebration will be when we can see ourselves going live and going on to various different platforms. And I think one thing that's going to make me extremely happy is when we are going to be able to serve diaspora audiences, people like Turkish people living in Germany who are currently not watching anything on broadcast. They can suddenly watch fast channels with Turkish movies and so on. And the Indian diaspora that we're also trying to serve. So I think that's going to make me very happy when I see us running across different fast channels with this very unique content that that's not there at the moment. So that'll be a big milestone for us. Hopefully we'll make some money. That'd be nice too.
I hope so, Christian. Christian, look, we need to wrap up. We've gone on, feels like it's been 2 minutes, but it's 35 minutes already. I always finish at the end of every single one of these since we started in series 1 by inviting my guests to give us an insight into the response to this question. If you could offer the younger you a piece of advice, what would it be?
Chill out. Don't be so incredibly hung up on whether you get the title or you get the project that you are aiming for. In those days, I was extremely driven, and if it didn't work out, I would be, if something didn't work out, I was devastated, right? It could really crush me when my deal didn't pan out or I didn't get the promotion and things like that. Things always work out. So that would be my advice to my younger self. I would have had a less stressful life if I'd known that earlier.
Brilliant. Christian Toksvig, it's been a pleasure personally and professionally talking to you. We spoke a lot of times before and I always enjoy our interactions. And I want to say thank you for taking the time to be a guest on the OTTRed Spotlight podcast. Thank you, Christian.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a real pleasure. And I think you're also a great entrepreneur and innovator for doing this in the first place. So thanks for that.
Appreciated.